be talking about today?
What?
There we go.
Okay.
It's just a microwave.
Can you guys hear it now? Can you hear David?
Yeah, if you hear it, just give us a thumbs up, please.
Yeah.
We'll appreciate it. So as I said, the nature of the topic, you can consider it sensitive or not. It's only the question is the timing of it and the source that it came from. And this one has to do with the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, involvement of Ukraine.
Yep.
Why should we be surprised?
Oh my gosh.
Shouldn't be.
Okay, and not just involvement in Ukraine, but involvement in Ukraine.
Indeed.
So basically, the New York Times came out with this bomb. Okay. So
well, before you go though, we're not gonna yet because we still have to.
I'm just like jumping.
I know,
I'm jumping.
But remember to keep that for the ramble also. Please make sure to type in where you are joining us from. If this is your first time here, just remember to subscribe. We will greatly appreciate it. And thanks to all for your continued support. It means a lot to us. Also, while I'm remember to join us for locals on Thursday. We did the first reaction.
We did a reaction video,
check it out over there. So we're going to be doing that on a regular basis.
Well, and they're the ones who asked for it, David.
Then that's it.
So
I'm going to figure out how it works sometimes. If it doesn't work for us to be together doing it, one of us will get on and just do that because it's only 5-10 minutes. So anyway, let's get into our topic because we got a lot to cover here. But again, we're going to continue the conversation on our next platform where we're going to detail a few other things in addition to some pictures. So I'll turn it over to you since you're excited about it. You start.
I am excited is an interesting word, but you know, I have come to a place, David, where everything is so ridiculous that you're either laughing or crying. And so I'm choosing to laugh because I don't want to live my life upset. And,
no.
I'm just offering that to you guys. Like, obviously pay attention and take things seriously, but man, you just got to laugh sometimes. And this is one of those times. So the CIA, apparently, according to the New York Times, which, as we know, is kind of the mouthpiece of certain organizations, perhaps, came out with this very massive article that basically said the U.S. has been waging a shadow war from Ukraine. They've basically militarized Ukraine after 2014, which, wow, I wonder who's been saying that for a really long time. And so this report confirms that the CIA built 12 secret spy bases in Ukraine, which is, by the way, one of the things that Putin accused the West of doing, accused the United States of doing, is basically weaponizing Ukraine. And so all of that talk that we had, all of that story that we had gotten fed, that it was about democracy.
No.
It turns out there's some real there are some real threats that Putin had identified appropriately. And I think that that's really, really important because out of the two countries, one of them has been lying and one of them hasn't.
Well, we know which one was lying. So,
yes, we sure do.
But this whole thing of the CIA, you have to go back to almost 2007. That's how far back you have to go. I do remember I was still in Washington. Remember, I left Washington in 2014, if I'm not somewhere around that time. So I was in the middle of knowing a few things regarding to this topic. I did spend some time in Uzbekistan. So if you know where Uzbekistan is vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis Russia and so forth, and why we were there. But this is what I'm saying. You have to know the background, and the background goes back to 2007.
Yeah.
There are two main things you need to understand. First is who was the U.S. ambassador to Russia at that time? Do you know?
No, I don't.
Is the
back in 2007?
Somewhere around that time.
No, I don't know.
It was the CIA director. William
Burns.
William Burns was the CIA, was the ambassador. Then after him came Mike McFaul, who is now in Stanford. Well, if you know two things about this gentleman here, that will give you an idea as to why things progressed from 2007 to 2011, and from 2011 took a different phase to 2014. Because in 2014, you all know what happened, right? Can you type that in a chat box?
Yeah,
type in, see what happened in 2014 regarding Ukraine. So here's the thing. there was a release of a secret memo at that time. It was written by William Burns. At that time, it was through a cable. If you know the word cable means, that's where the sensitive classified information goes into the system between all the US embassies around the world and Washington. So, well, in it, it was a conversation about how the urgent need to ensure that the fall of the Russians will have to be done one way or another. So basically what William Burns did is starting to map out. That's why these things evolve over time. There are a lot of people who are saying, oh, this Ukraine conflict just happened in 2022 when the Russian military operations started. No,
it sure did not.
It goes way back when Obama took over in 2008. And this is why that memo, when it came out, later on, Ambassador McFaul was appointed as the U.S. ambassador. Now, one thing about McFaul, which, by the way, he put something on Twitter, and I kind of challenged him on it. Never heard back from him. So
that's
I don't trust the guy, because here is the reason why. And I have nothing against him. So if he's listening or whatever, he's in Stanford. And if you only know Stanford and Yale, two of them will link to Navalny. So it's all a web. And this is where the agency comes behind the scenes. So just to go back to Michael McFaul, is the one who authored the 7-point bullet points for how to change a regime change. It was Michael McFaul. And the deal was made at that time between State departments and certain entities inside Ukraine. That's how it's all evolved from 2007 to 2011. From 2011, he moved into 2014. What was the nail on the coffin in 2014? It was when the Crimean citizens wanted to identify with Russia. And right there at that time, that's when Ukrainian government came to the agency, even though the agency was involved before, and said, this is a golden opportunity. That's how it happened. So now you shouldn't ignore the role of MI6.
Absolutely.
CIA will never do anything without MI6 and vice versa. You go back to 1953. What happened in 1953, if anybody can remember? Somebody put a comment, by the way, saying, the professor is here. He's asking me a question.
That's true. It's what happens in class.
And it's all about just sharing knowledge. I'm sure you guys know this one. But a major event in 1953 in the Middle East that involved both agencies, MI6 and the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, the big questions, like what you mentioned at the beginning, why all of a sudden New York Times is releasing that?
And I think that is a phenomenal question, if not the question. Because I think that this report, right? Because this, like you said, the people who know what's been going on over the last few decades, because most people in the world, if not the United States, learned that Ukraine existed in 2 years ago in February, right?
22nd,
that's when they realized that Ukraine was even a place, right? More or less, and definitely not like even where it was on a map or any of that. And so they don't understand the history of it, the history behind it. And there's even a clip that circulated around the internet of Bill Gates actually talking about how corrupt the government of Ukraine was a few years ago. And so people who understand knew that a lot of this corruption was going on, and the people in the European countries that were next to Ukraine definitely knew that was going on. And so when it was touted as this like beacon of democracy in Europe, that was one of the craziest things to me. I'm half Polish, and so that's something that my family's in Poland. It's what I knew about. And so it just, what is the reason that this is coming out right now? So go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, just the quick answer that comes to mind right away is that it has to do with ensuring that the story stays relevant for the American audience.
I agree.
But again, why will it that? Is to highlight how important Ukraine in sort of forging this path of so-called democracy. The other thing will have to do with our own elections, presidential elections. That's a key point to all that. But again, the timing of it can be ignored.
It can't.
It can't.
It absolutely can't.
But if you know the role of the New York Times, for example, the Washington Post, the media outlet, which there's one part here that I'm not going to talk about here. I'll talk about it on Rumble.
Yeah.
And I know this for a fact because I was working in Washington, so you kind of aware of what's going on, how it works. So that is the idea of when you have entities like New York Times, or even the mainstream media, it becomes the question of, are the people and masses that is here in the US consuming that information coming out of CNN, out of MSNBC, NBS, ABC, whatever those media outlets are? No, you're not gonna trust what they're saying because and again, there are some things we're not gonna discuss here. We'll discuss
on Rumble.
Just remind me about remind me CNN and IDF.
Okay.
And now we know what it is. So, because I will have to disclose this to you guys for you to understand the narrative of why. So the whole idea of why New York Times all of a sudden, well, New York Times has always been the back door of the agency.
So I have a theory, because I'm not in the rooms. I don't work at New York Times. I don't know what the truth is. But more and more, so at the very beginning of the conflict, do you remember when they said, well, the US really isn't involved, it's not a proxy war, it's not a proxy war? Okay, well, so the longer this is drawn out, the more the US involvement has sort of come to light and come to light. Right now, there's a huge struggle for continuing to send money to Ukraine. So that's currently in the House right now. So even Biden is meeting with basically the big four congressional leaders over the Ukraine situation. My take on it, this is my personal opinion on it, is that because the U.S. population has really lost its taste for this conflict, and there's even a fight in the government over it, that it had to be shown that the U.S. more or less had to take a bigger step in. And so to show that this isn't actually new, this is relevant to the American people. I don't think it's relevant to the American people.
No, it's not. It's nonsense.
But that this is actually something that the U.S. has been doing for a very long time, for more than a decade, quite frankly. But it puts it in a different light of like, we actually are very much more involved than we have said we are. Because if it's a completely irrelevant conflict that we just sort of got into sort of in a proxy setting, but no, this really makes it that the U.S. has been directly involved in this, and that the U.S. thinks that Russia is a much bigger enemy than it's said that it thinks it is. Because for this to have been going on to this extent, to me, it's trying to solidify with the American people, this is a really big threat. And I don't believe that, guys. Okay. To be clear. But that's what I think is trying to be slipped in here, is making it a bigger deal than was originally stated to the American people, because the American people are losing support for it. The hawks are who want this money to go. But right now there's a really big fight because people here in the United States don't want that money leaving the US. And for good reason. But that's my take, is to solidify that this is a much bigger and more important conflict than the American people were sold to begin with. That's my personal take on it. Because if you look at the questions about Ukraine, what are they? It's always, why are we there? What are we doing there? Why are we sending money there? Why are we there?
But also they understand, when I say they, the establishment, along with the media, understand that in the US, we don't possess, and again, I don't say it in a negative way, but it's the truth and fact. We don't possess the necessary critical thinking to think in terms of, of course you can't trust the government. That's a foregone conclusion, no matter what.
Unfortunately.
But for majority of us Americans, we just consume the information without even thinking it through. So this is one of those to push for it into that direction, let alone coming out from an outlet like New York Times.
Yeah.
But again, if you know the history of the link between New York Times and the IC, the intelligence community, and also the Pentagon, and this is where all this comes together. That's why there are certain things I will not disclose here. I will disclose them in a Rumble. That's what we're going to do it immediately while I'm still remembering this. It's because when you think about what took place after the ouster of Yanukovych, what did happen right after that? The head of the spy agency in Ukraine stumbled on some documents, and immediately, what did he do? Immediately called on two individuals, the head of MI6 in Ukraine and the CIA representatives in the Ukraine. They call them chief of station, whatever that is, CUS. And right there, that's when I said earlier at the beginning, to them it was a golden opportunity.
Yeah.
So, but the involvement has been from a way back.
Way
you
back.
Look at this,
way
the Russians knew about it. I read I think I read I read some analysis from overseas. I don't remember where. I wish I could keep that one. By which it was a conversation from the equivalency of foreign policy think tank in Moscow. And those are academicians. Those are not politicians. They are not part of the Kremlin, whatever. Those are academic. And I do read some stuff of that translated. Of course, things can get lost in translations. Well, one of the things that caught my attention when I read that analysis or that white paper was that the idea that Russians' concern from the get-go was about, will this turn to another what took place in Afghanistan, remember? During the Soviet Union presence, how it took. That's what the Russians were very concerned about. And this is why now, where things are, I don't know, would we call it stalemate? No. To me, in my opinion, I won't, because knowing the reality on the ground where things are, Ukraine is a failed state. We're trying to keep the narrative alive.
I absolutely think
but that
true.
narrative ain't gonna succeed. Ain't gonna succeed because some of us Americans are fed up with all this. And the question that many of us are asking now, what's in it for us?
Absolutely.
Why our tax dollars are being spent on something that has nothing to do with our welfare? And this is the key question that I believe it's gonna be asked. And this is why, when you have a story breaking out through media like this, remember, media is always the back door of the there are three entities involved: IC, the intelligence community, there's the Pentagon or the military industrial complex, and the third one is the diplomatic corps, which is part of the State Departments. That's when they coordinate. This is, to me, where I believe this a whole idea of understanding the emergence of this information is just to keep the narrative alive. Why? Because it's becoming clear day after day that the West calculations were wrong. It was the same argument we've made on this show right here. You guys can go back, check the record. We made the argument that, mark our word, sanctions going to backfire on the West. And here we are.
No, you're absolutely right. When you brought up the fact that when the US sanctioned Russia, that was sort of the end, it was too far. And that's exactly what's happened. And quite frankly, this is a very embarrassing. I don't know what either the intelligence community or the New York Times, I don't know what the response is that they expected from this. But quite frankly, this is very embarrassing, because the United States, Ukraine has not defeated Russia, right? So they haven't kicked Russia out of Ukraine. Every account that we've had over the last 6 months has been that it's either a stalemate or that Russia is winning. So that's all that we've had over the last, I think it's maybe about 6 months, maybe longer. And so the United States has had 12 secret spy bases, and they've been training Ukraine's elite soldiers for the last decade plus, and we still aren't winning in Ukraine.
Well, they are
Do you know
now.
what I'm saying? That's wildly embarrassing, actually.
there are right now voices or yeah, voices of reason inside the country that is not questioning the whole existence of the Central Intelligence Agency, because it has moved from its original
Right.
reason or raison d'être, why it was created to begin with, to something that is very nefarious. And a
Yeah.
lot of people who understand how the domestic politics works, or even for that matter international affairs, are coming to a grip with the reality of what is the agency role now,
Right.
because it stepped beyond its duties, or sort of the boundaries, that
Yeah.
it became blurry as to the agency, as you may
Right.
guys know, that is supposed to operate outside the US, not
Yeah.
inside the US. But if you look at the history, you go back to the 70s, what happened back in Southern California. And as a matter of fact, I will even go as far as 1948. That's how far back I will go.
Yeah.
What happened in 1948?
Yeah.
We rigged the Italian elections. It
Mhm.
was 1 year after the CIA was established.
Yeah.
1 year. And at that time, it was George Kennan, at the time the head of the father of CIA, as they call him. They said, well, if we didn't rig these elections, you will never have a free elections in Italy.
Well, if you rig an election,
Yeah.
it's not free.
Well, yeah,
Gonna like put
that's
that out
one.
there.
And second, who gives us the rights to interfere in another elections? If we are to say in a democracy,
sure.
you're going to let society decide for
Right.
themselves. But that, in my opinion, and not only my opinion, but based on historical fact, it paved the way for now a new role for the agency that it was created for.
Well, so here's the big rub.
Yeah.
Okay. The big rub is that markets hate uncertainty.
Yeah.
Okay. Large corporations, corporate interests, and markets hate uncertainty.
Yeah.
And so there was actually Larry Fink from BlackRock. There's a clip of him. I wonder if I can find it. Maybe you guys can find this link and post it on Rumble. But Larry Fink is talking about the fact basically that to make sure that markets have stability and they have certainty, you have to make sure that that's the case by making sure that there's no uncertainty. So you have to make this certainty. And what do political leaders, when they come in, they change regimes, they change laws, they change the way that their country does business.
Yeah.
And so then what do you have? You have to keep corporate interests alive. You have to make sure that the people coming in, first of all, okay, this drives me insane.
Yeah.
But first of all, you have to make it look free. And so how does it have to be done? It has to be done in secret. Because if you do it out in the open, the people will see that you're doing it and they'll revolt against it. So you have to do it in secret. And then you have to convince them that it's not happening. You have to convince them that they're just crazy, and the people who see it happening are crazy. And what has happened, I'll talk more about this on Rumble, but what happened over the last few years with the big C word that I am not going to say here on YouTube, but the big C word. So everybody who sees these things happening, they're labeled something, they're called something that means that they're crazy. That means that they're seeing things that don't exist, right? But you can't do these things in the open light. I think if the United States, if people had known that the US was involved this entire time to this extent, I actually think we probably would not have gotten into this conflict, because the narrative of it's about democracy, I'm not sure would have held up.
But at the same time, it will be hard to even imagine that it will be a change, because we got a population that is so duped into, it's kind of, to me, it becomes very concerning that we have become this incompetent. And again, I'm not generalizing, or I'm not specific. I'm saying I'm talking in a big picture here. Majority of us Americans are clueless as to what's going on even in this country here. So let alone something like that, they won't even understand it. The government finds it convenient, of course, to push the narrative that way. And this is part of why I believe things have evolved, and there is always that idea of nation building. Remember, we've always been pushing that narrative of nation building. So we'll destroy something and we say we're gonna rebuild it, which we never did anyway.
Don't worry, you'll win hearts and minds in the meantime.
Because
that worked really well.
I can only imagine now the kids that when I used to travel, like I've been in war zones and all that stuff, and you see the look on some kids back then, and back then, literally, I would be asking myself, what they're gonna be thinking 20 years from now.
Who are they gonna grow up
because
to
now
be?
they are Yeah, and you can just see the anger in their eyes.
Well, and rightfully so.
And kind of like I was shaking my head in a sense of, well, I am here.
Yeah.
It's kind of it caught up with me over time.
Yeah.
It caught up with me. I'll admit it. It caught up with me over time, that you start to ask yourself, which side do you want to be on?
Yeah.
There's the right side, there's the wrong side. There's not a thing in between.
Yeah.
You're either this way or that way. So you decide which one.
Well,
And,
it's interesting because, I do feel like, and I've met people who were not in the CIA, right?
Yeah.
And not in these big letter agencies. The thing is, they were good people, but I never met the people at the top. And there is a very wise quote that says, an organization rots from the top down, not the bottom up.
Which is true.
I think so.
Which is true.
And so I'm not trying to say that these organizations are not filled with some good people who
No, they are. They are.
But from the top down, if it's the same with government, right? Government rots from organizations, government, whoever it is, rot from the top down, not the bottom up.
Actually, I was aware of some analysts inside the agency that they were pushing against this narrative of sanctions and so forth. They were
smart people. There's smart people in there.
But it won't work. It won't make its way to the top, because that's how why our system is corrupted. So, but there is a reason to all this, and this is one thing I'd rather talk about on Rumble, because of how it is intertwined with the system.
Yeah.
And we just can, I'm sure you guys understand, and we will talk about it on Rumble when we get there. But just to understand all this, don't be shocked or surprised, oh my gosh, CIA was involved. What you need to be asking yourself as an intelligent individual is, why now? Why now? The timing of it. Again, New York Times will not release, and by the way, no story ever gets released without approval. I'm telling you this based on experience. If story needs to be killed, it will be killed one way or another. So for the same thing goes when it is released.
You know what this reminds me of?
Yeah.
Do you remember, it was not very long ago, but I think it was Viktor Orban, who was
against the European Union for allocating the funding.
Exactly, for Ukraine. And what slipped, what got leaked into the media, that the EU was planning to tank their economy. Now, I don't believe for 1 second that got leaked. I believe that was something that got leaked to basically show them what they could do to him if he did not agree. If he did not agree for the funding package to Ukraine. By the way, if somebody is going to do something like that, it is wrong. Pay attention to, there are a lot of people who believe the ends justify the means. And if you believe that, more power to you. But you think that there's always something there. There's always something that really shouldn't be done in that case. But if you're looking at an entity that's willing to tank your country's economy because they don't want to send money to Ukraine.
But at the same time, also, I will hold him accountable for that as well.
For which part?
You are a head of state. If you are thinking about the welfare of your nation, and I understand how diplomacy works, I understand all that, but it's not better to take stand and take it to the people and ask
and
you
let
people
them to decide.
Do you want me to get our country out of the EU altogether? Or you want us to, or you want me to keep, there will be didn't do that. I don't know why. And I'm not criticizing Viktor Orban. The conditions inside the country, he will be better positioned to understand than me here over the Atlantic.
For sure.
It just was that idea of, if they are pressuring him that way, what will happen if he would said, well, that's fine, but I'm leaving the EU altogether? Remember, Orban, or Hungary for that matter, where does it get most of its gas from? Russia. Russia. So that's why they were pushing against it. But and at the same time, the whole EU, you get countries that are useless into the EU. The EU itself is useless, becoming. And now you're seeing, I'm sure you guys are aware of what's going on with the farmers over there. And the farmers now, Yeah, I watched yesterday some videos that's been through
Yeah.
overseas, how the farmers now breaking through the barricades in Brussels,
Mhm.
right in front of the EU Parliament. So
I have a theory on that actually. Like
yeah,
I have a theory on what's happening in Europe for that.
yeah,
But for that, we're also going to talk about it
yeah.
on
We'll
Rumble
do it on
because
a Rumble, and
I can see something emerging
yeah,
in that particular realm,
yeah,
and it's something that we have here that I think is trying to be exported to Europe, and I think Europe fundamentally isn't set up that way. So
yeah,
we'll talk about it more on Rumble because I absolutely see a pattern emerging
yeah.
there.
Well, actually, if it is, how about if we just go to Rumble, and or you want to keep?
Well,
We'll talk a little
let's
bit more
dive a
here.
little bit more
Yeah.
here into what this actually says, because it's
Okay.
also interesting that it came out after the Vladimir Putin interview, which
Oh yeah,
the
with
Vladimir Putin interview gained a lot of traction, and I think rightfully so because it's the first time that the people in the West actually really heard
I heard
from
the other side. Yeah, that's true.
which should be standard journalism. That should be the standard that journalism is held to, that you interview both sides,
Yeah.
you get both objective sides of the situation, and you let people decide for themselves. That is what journalism should be.
Well, unfortunately, we don't have journalism anymore.
Apparently
yeah,
not.
no.
I don't know
No,
if we
the
ever
whole
did, but we
West.
certainly
There
don't
are
now.
some good correspondents there, whatever, but they are being told what to report and not to report. So even for them, I'm aware of one particular individual. Even when I was in DC, her name is Catherine Heritage. She used to be the intelligence correspondent. She's the one handling the intelligence reportings and all that for CBS. You know what happened to her? They fired her. They just fired her.
Oh, that's really.
She's a decent person, and I am not promoting her, whatever. Here, she doesn't know me. I know of her.
Yeah.
But it's just the idea of because I used to listen to her and read her stuff objective.
Yeah.
It was till she touched on a key subject regarding Biden's son. They yanked her out.
Wow.
And you know what they did the next day?
What?
They raided her home.
Wow.
That's how nasty they can
my
get. Yeah,
God.
they raided her homes
Yeah.
because of the
Yeah.
because she was getting
Too
really
close, yeah.
into what to me that's what a journalist does.
I agree.
She
I
wasn't.
agree.
She had nothing against the Biden family or whatever. She was doing her job by providing the facts.
She was doing her
and
job.
look what they did to her. So that's why journalism as a whole in the West, it's because of the massive corruption. But again, you have to understand the entanglement with other entities that form this in the big picture of all this. This is why this story, this breaking story about the CIA, it's part of the mechanisms of how the entities and the government work together behind the scenes.
Yeah.
That's to me where that issue is. So journalism, for what Tucker Carlson did regarding the interview, that's you give the guy credit,
right? Whether you
even
like
though,
him or not,
yeah,
you give him credit.
I don't agree with him on certain topics and all certain issues, whatever. Nonetheless, you give credit where credit is due.
You know what I hear?
Yeah.
You know what I think is wild is that we have to preface it with, we don't agree with everything that everyone said. Well, of course you don't, right?
Yeah.
That should be understood and normal.
Exactly. Yeah.
That you don't agree with everybody.
Well, it's because our society has changed now. If you disagree with someone, you become the enemy.
I know.
And
that's
since
crazy.
since when we have become the idea of just because I have a different opinion than yours doesn't make me the enemy.
No,
so you look at to me, it's always those people who are not willing. Anytime throughout my life, anytime I run to people like that, I always come to the conclusion that for those people, hearing the truth is too much.
It's too much.
Yeah. And that's why I kind of avoid all those people altogether, because that negative energy, it's not even worth it, my time.
It's not.
But when you look at it, when it comes down to, geopolitical matters, international affairs, and so forth, that understanding that truth or knowing about that truth is very, very important. Very important.
Well, and the fact is that it is truth, whether you want to admit it or not, whether you want to.
Well, it's a part of a reality. That's how it is. You can forge your path in life by cutting corners and cheating and all that. It ain't gonna last forever. yeah, you might get away with it for a while, but it
Yeah.
will catch up with you one day.
Absolutely.
I'm a believer, and again, I speak for myself, of a karma.
I am
What
too.
goes around comes around, no matter
Absolutely.
what.
Yeah.
Sometimes in life, it might be to when you get in closer to checking out.
Mm-hmm.
You just never know. So you said to yourself, well, how do you want to live?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you decide on that at an early age, in my opinion. But
Mm-hmm.
so those people are having a hard time accepting the reality. And this is where you see this kind of manipulations coming out of entities. Again, if you only know the entanglement between the likes of New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, Fox, all of them,
Well, and look at who owns them, right? Always, like, it's crazy that
that's true.
people don't pay attention to the fact that mass media outlets are
It's
owned by people
individuals,
and they are for-profit organizations.
Yeah.
Now, this is not, they're not free, right?
No, no,
This
no.
not free. They're not paid for by tax dollars. I mean, I'm sure that there are probably some subsidies somewhere, but
They do, actually. The media, I found out,
Mhm.
the broadcasting systems in America, whatever,
Oh,
they
are
get some
subsidized?
funding. Yeah, they get some funding of
yeah,
sort.
some kind of funding.
And the FCC, the
Yeah.
Federal Communication,
Yeah,
whatever,
yeah.
has to regulate all this. I read somewhere
Mhm.
about it when I was in DC. So
Yeah.
they do get some funding of sort, But again, the owners are
Yeah.
millionaires, billionaires, whatever.
Well, and the funding comes from us
Tax
who are
money,
watching
yeah.
it, right?
Well, the whole damn government,
Yeah.
sorry, pardon me, the whole government exists and operates because of us. So another
Right.
word,
Absolutely.
the government, it's our government. So we have to decide, not the other way around.
Right.
But you ask average Joe, average Jane, will they even understand what that concept is? They're gonna like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Oh,
I agree
Dr. O,
completely.
what do you mean
Absolutely.
by that?
Yeah.
Can you break it down? Well, I'll break it down in a simple term, that the government exists because we want it to exist.
Right.
So, in other words, power lies with people,
It
not
does.
the government.
Absolutely.
Not the government. So you have to break it down to people to understand, because they are so preoccupied with the incendiary things that really won't matter, because that's where their
Yeah.
focus is. But again, their focus is because it has been
Mhm.
perpetuated that way, has been planned for it to
Yeah.
be that way, either with through different medium, by bombarding them from different angles, so they don't know where to
Yeah.
look at. So when you have somebody that's confused, they're not going to think straight.
Yeah.
This is where I said earlier about that critical thinking doesn't exist,
Mhm.
because we don't even have it in our schools.
Oh, no.
Schools now,
No.
forget about it.
Well, and remember the Rockefeller quote that
Oh, yeah,
I want to build a nation of workers, not a
Not
nation of thinkers,
thinkers, yeah.
something like that.
Which is true.
And that's what we have fundamentally. And it's interesting now because so much funding has been taken out of schools.
Yeah.
People are starting to actually and teachers too. I mean, teachers don't like, I have so many friends who are teachers that are like, I went to school for this. I paid a lot of money for my degree in education. It was my dream to be a teacher,
Yeah.
and it is miserable, and I am leaving. The amount of my friends that I know who are leaving the profession or have left the profession of teaching because it's become so miserable. So it's not just kids. I mean, it's everybody sort of involved in that system. Because it's falling apart, people are starting to actually pay attention to what it is. But if you look at something like if you look at something like a homeschool system, for example, the kids are in school for like 2 hours a day instead of the 8 hours or so that kids are in school right now. And so but fundamentally, we don't have a nation of thinkers. We have a nation of workers. And so you have that as a result, but it's becoming harder and harder to keep your head in the sand. So I want to talk about some of the things that they brought up in here, because they are fundamentally interesting. So Ukraine as an intelligence gathering hub, I think is really worth talking about. So what it says is, in more than 200 interviews, current and former officials in Ukraine, the United States, and Europe describe a partnership that is nearly founded from mutual distrust before it steadily expanded. That's interesting. Because remember, you were talking about a couple shows ago that the United States was spying on Angela Merkel in Germany.
Yeah.
That's not you. That's
Oh, I
not just
remember
her,
that.
right?
I remember that.
So there was a fundamental mistrust, which is, I think, accurate based on everything that we've learned over the last few years.
Yeah.
I definitely see that's probably accurate. Turning Ukraine into an intelligence gathering hub that intercepted more Russian communications than the CIA station in Kyiv could initially handle. Many of the officials spoke on conditions of anonymity. Okay, now these intelligence networks are more important than ever. So there is a slant. Okay, so there is a slant to this article, because now these intelligence networks are more important than ever, as Russia is on the offensive and Ukraine is more dependent on sabotage and long-range missile strikes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If Republicans in Congress and military funding to Kyiv, the CIA may have to scale back. So back to what I was saying earlier, that I do think that this is a piece to try and help encourage people to want to continue the conflict in Ukraine.
Yeah, it's not gonna work. It's not gonna work. It's because Ukraine is gone.
Yeah.
Ukraine is done for, and that goes back to that beginning of when the whole military operation started. There's gonna be a fight to the last Ukrainian, and that's exactly what. This is why you're seeing the comedian Z now. I just bouncing from one place to the next. But the guy is a comedian. What do you expect? I mean, he's not.
Absolutely.
He's just been given the talking points to do all this, and that's about it. That's where it will end. Usually, with something like this, how it always ends, it ends by some malfunction of a plane, something into that effect, because he's been exposed to so much.
Yeah.
So if he ever talks, so usually that's how usually.
Oh my God, his plane just had an accident.
That's usually how it ends.
Crash. How many times have we heard that? Celebrities dying in accidental plane crashes, politicians.
We did this before, too many before. So you look at what happened to, what's his name?
Oh yeah,
Lumumba in Africa way back.
And this just happened to the guy from the mercenary agency. What do they call? Oh man,
Prigozhin.
Yeah, Prigozhin. Yeah.
Well, his case is slightly different. Yeah, and it could be that's from the other side, but again, that's prompted the conversation about crossing the red line.
Yeah,
because that's what it was, and I think it was. You need to deal with this once for all.
Yeah,
and I think that's what it was, because there are certain red lines. Each country has its own red lines, or whatever, the leadership, whatever. But that's what was the issue, because now you don't hear about that anymore.
Oh no, you don't hear anything about it. It's like that didn't even
exist.
There
is a new guy now who's heading that entity.
Yeah,
and they are now in Africa. As a matter of fact, there is now a coordination going on with some countries in Africa regarding. So it's a big picture.
They didn't disappear, despite the fact that Prigozhin may have disappeared. Yeah. They did not. The Wagner Group. That's it.
Yeah. But again, remember, there are certain aspects to all this that sometimes what is being announced versus what it is are the opposite.
Sure.
I was aware of a case where someone said, well, he died. He never did. And it was found 25 years later.
With a new face.
That is correct. So I was aware of this case, and till they terminated the guy permanently.
Yeah. But 25 years later.
Well, because they've been looking for him for 25 years.
Yeah.
That just shows you there's always this outs and outs.
It's actually very amazing to me how little we really know.
Yeah.
Right? We're told these things and we think we know what reality is, and then something comes along and it shatters that reality entirely. And then the only conclusion I have is to realize that I really don't know very much, and that I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's humbled me phenomenally. When I was in my 20s and I was in early 20s, late teens, early 20s, and I was in college. In college, you tend to think you know everything, right? You think you know exactly how to solve all the world's problems. You think you know everything. And then the older I got, the more I realized I actually don't know almost anything. And the best thing to do is to keep an open mind and be an actual free thinker.
Yeah.
Because the reality, whatever reality you're in, changes. It's the only constant is change. And so it's the only position to really be in.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to have to go to a Rumble. We're going to,
Okay.
guys, sign out here. Please keep your question and bring it over to a Rumble. We will answer. I saw one question over there. We'll answer it over there, and you can just prepare your questions, and we will see you in about 5 minutes on a Rumble. As always, prepare yourself for changing world order. Till next time. See you soon. Bye.